Say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you're logging in from. It is, as always, a global audience today, so really appreciate your time. I'm joined by the CEO of Northern Shield Resources, Ian Bliss, who's recently relocated to Newfoundland, closer to root and cellar. Ian, how are you today?
I am doing very well. Thank you very much, Romeo.
Awesome. Now, here's how today's going to work, just for the folks in the room. Ian's going to run through a bit of a quick presentation. Then I've got some questions for him, but this is an interactive event, as always. That chat button in the bottom right of your screen, please do ask questions throughout today's event. I'll try to get to as many as we can. Any that I miss, I will make sure that Ian and the Northern Shield team gets them so they can get back to you as quickly as possible. I'll send along the email or phone number or both that you're registered with so you can get to you. This event is also being recorded and will be available for replay probably at 3 p.m. Eastern. So it'll come right into your inbox. It'll also be available on Six's YouTube channel. But enough out of me. I want to get into the protein as quickly as possible. So I know, Ian, Northern Shield's recent findings in the Creston quarries seem to have opened up a whole new dimension to root and cellar. It has raised a lot of questions, though. I've seen. I live on the chat sites, and I do see people are asking, why explore for copper now? So I'm quite thrilled to throw it to you to explain what's got the team at Northern Shield so excited about that copper porphyry potential, and how it all fits together with the epithermal gold story. So I'll throw it to you to start off.
Excellent, and thank you very much, Romeo, for having me again. And I hope that everybody, at the end of this presentation, instead of asking why are we exploring for copper now, you should be asking yourselves or asking ourselves, why didn't we explore for this earlier? But I'm most happy to share with you these very exciting developments on the copper aspect of our root and cellar property, and very much how this fits in with the epithermal gold that we also have at root and cellar has been the focus to date. Before I get started on the presentation, I do have to bring your attention to this forward-looking statement advisory, as this presentation will contain such statements. So again, for those of you who don't know Northern Shield, we're very well known for thinking outside the box. That's how we ended up here at Root and Cellar. We initiate our own projects, either by ourselves or in conjunction with prospectors in underexplored regions that have the correct geological conditions to support the notion of a very large deposit. And of course, if you're thinking of a large deposit, you must make sure that the geology supports that. And while many view greenfield exploration, especially as early stage as Northern Shield undertakes, as a risk, we see it as an opportunity, and that's an opportunity to discover a world-class deposit at relatively low cost and near surface, simply because no one's looked at it before. And that seems to be very much the case, once again, with root and cellar. And so root and cellar is two stories, really. It's the gold and the copper porphyry. We've always known we've had both. In fact, I think the very initial discovery by the prospector was the copper. He then went on to find gold at the Conquest zone. And while exploration to date has focused on the gold, the Creston Copper zone is actually the largest sort of element anomaly on the property. As many of you know, or I've said before, epithermal gold and porphyry copper are related. They're basically end members of the same hydrothermal system. Typically, the copper porphyry is much deeper, sitting on top of an intrusive stock, whereas your epithermal gold is higher up. Typically, your high sulfidation is going to be right above your porphyry in your stock, where your intermediate and your low is sort of off to the sides, where there's lower temperature. But typically, this distance here between your gold and your copper may be 1,000 or 2,000 meters, but for various reasons, they can be just opposed to one another. So you actually see them relatively side by side, or the same sort of paleo surface or same level. And that's what seems to be happening at root and cellar. And so the important thing, too, is both the gold and the copper at root and cellar also seem to be associated with tellurium. So that's a little bit about root and cellar. Now, in Newfoundland, I say the property is located in the Burin Peninsula of Newfoundland. We think this is strategic. I say it's on the Atlantic seaboard. Nearly all other copper porphyries are on the Pacific Rim. So if we can find something significant here, we think it's of strategic importance, both to Canada, the eastern seaboard of the United States, and perhaps even Europe. In fact, the island, for those viewers that are coming in from Europe, Newfoundland is actually closer to Europe than it is to the west coast of Canada. And I say the Avalon terrain, which root and cellar sits in, hosts numerous early stage occurrences of both copper porphyry and high, low, and intermediate epithermal gold occurrences. So the Burin Peninsula, I'll start off on a big scale, and the importance of certain aspects of of the Burin Peninsula to Root and Cellar. And in the middle of the Burin Peninsula, in the sort of what we call the ankle bracelet, there's a very distinct topographic low. This is a topographic digital elevation map on the left and a magnetic map on the right. And you can see there's a very distinct break, generally low ground, in that area. On the magnetic map, you see a similar sort of break. To the north and to the south, the magnetic signature parallels the peninsula, whereas in the middle, it cuts across. And we believe that's caused by rifting or some sort of extension. The Avalon terrain, as with most epithermal terrains, are collisional, they're compressional. But some of the better porphyries are in areas where you get slight extension or strength tension, and that creates an opening, so it's much more magmatic activity is much more readily to happen. If you're getting increased magmatic activity, you're getting increased hydrothermal activity, which is ultimately what generates your copper and your gold mineralization. As you can see on these maps in the blue triangles, there's also a number of fluorite occurrences in the Burin Peninsula. You go to the parts of the western United States where they have both epithermal gold and copper porphyry. There's a lot of fluorite mineralization. And that's because fluorite is often linked to these alkaline intrusions. They have fluorine-rich magmatic fluids, and that scavenges and transports copper and molybdenum in particular much better than some other fluids. Then, of course, I've said we have a lot of tellurium at Root and Cellar, as you'll see, and now we're finding diatreme breccia. So certainly on the big picture, we have a lot of those ingredients on sort of a regional scale that sets the foundations for a giant, copper porphyry potential and epithermal gold system. So I mentioned tellurium. Tellurium is a critical metal. It's a key component in solar panels. It's one of the rarest elements on the planet, actually 8 times more rare than gold. And its primary source is as a byproduct of certain epithermal gold occurrences and copper porphyry. You very, very rarely find it in mineable quantities on its own. And right now, about 90% of the world tellurium is currently produced in China. So it's a critical metal. But one of the reasons I like tellurium as well is it's often associated with some of the world's largest epithermal gold and copper porphyry deposits. So just to summarize Root and Cellar for those that you are unfamiliar with, it consists of 5 gold occurrences over about a 6-kilometer strike length, again associated with silver and tellurium. Particularly the gold occurrences along what we call the north flank are associated with very high tellurium and high silver values. And to say the property was originally discovered by a local prospector, and Northern Shield is the first company to conduct methodical exploration on the property. Like most of our focus, as you'll know, has been on the Conquest zone since we optioned the property in 2019. But I say the Creston Copper Target is really the largest target within the property, and is really going to be the focus of this presentation today. But before we get into that, we'll just quickly summarize the drilling. I know a lot of you are waiting for assay results. We prompted the lab the other day, and we're told it's still going to be probably mid-October before we get those results. Part of that is due to we're using a different analytical package than we normally do because we're trying to get a lower detection limits for the tellurium. And apparently that's one of the reasons for delaying things, along with the backlog in the labs. So the drilling, I say, just to summarize that, so the western target's what we call the Hotter's Pond, mostly just alteration, illite, sericite, pyrite. This is typical alterations of low sulfidation systems. Hole 30 up here was actually drilling to test a copper target, but we seem to hit hydrothermal breccia similar to what we see in the Conquest zone, not as heavily silicified. So we're interested to see if we see anomalous gold up in hole 30. And then a lot of it was down in and around the main sort of central Conquest zone. In particular, what's of interest is hole 33 and 34, because it's in those holes that we get, number one, what we call Gingiro banding. This is classic low sulfidation epithermal gold textures. These bands typically are high in silver minerals, and that's why the black color's in there, and that's also where you're going to get your gold. So this is the first time we've seen Gingiro banding on the property, along with some very distinct crustiform, coliform banded quartz veins. And typically this is a classic texture of low sulfidation. So we'll see, we're waiting for assays for this, as well as hole number 34. We hit about 30 meters, I think 30 meters off the top of my head, perhaps even closer to 40. Silicification, alteration, and a lot of this bladed pyrite. It's a little bit hard to see in there, but fairly big intersection of silica, quartz, and pyrite. So these are holes that we're certainly very encouraged with. along with some other ones that hit a little bit deeper underneath the Conquest zone that we're hoping will come back just with some elevated gold to show that those structures do continue to depth. So now moving on to the copper target, which is really where we've been focused the last few weeks since the end of the drill program and waiting for assays. So I'm actually going to step back and again start at a sort of a regional perspective or property scale perspective. And this is actually a diagram we had out years ago showing the Creston Copper anomaly in the sort of green shaded area here. It coincides with soil samples that are highly anomalous in tellurium, represented by the blue dots. Then we have what we call these shoulder anomalies, which are pretty common in copper porphyry systems, where you get anomalous sort of arsenic, antimony, and perhaps lead zinc on the fringes. And that's exactly what we're seeing here on the shoulders of this copper target. And of course, that's also where a lot of our gold sits, both Conquest, drop zone a little bit further afield. You have Red Rock and Braxton Bradley is further to the north. So you have these shoulder anomalies again, so that right from the get-go reinforces or supports the idea that we could be sitting on a large copper porphyry at Creston. Zooming in now, so what is sort of Creston? It's about a 2 kilometer wide anomaly, both based on soil samples represented by the green dots, and the squares are grab samples from the surface with copper values. Some of them up to 10.5% grab sample. This is actually chalcocite in a pyroclastic rock, so that's a volcanic rock. And chalcocite is often produced by something called supergene enrichment. So that's, again, after the deposits form, you get circulating fluids that strip away the sulfur and actually hence then enrich that mineral, change it, and becomes more enriched in copper relative to sulfide. So this is an indication of circulating fluids, typically post-mineralization. But much of the mineralization, particularly found by the prospect initially, was in and around these quarries, which we're going to have a closer look at. Again, nearly 9% copper, more typically in the 1 to 2% range as higher samples. And again, some pretty spectacular looking chalcopyrite sitting in these diatreme breccias. So we'll now zoom in to have a closer look at some of these quarries. So these quarries are within Northern Shield's property, but there's a difference between quarrying rights and mining rights. And what they're quarrying are these diatreme breccias, and they're consist of rhyolite, which is a very hard rock, and they're actually sealing in a rhyolite matrix, and that's why they're probably using it as road aggregate, because it's a very hard rock, but it breaks easily around the contacts. So they've been quarrying this since the prospector first sort of walked on the property, but they've been expanding it from the road sort of westward. So again, all these green squares are his copper samples from surface grab samples. Some of it's directly from outcrop, some of it's blasted material, but it's all very, very local. This white dashed line marks what we think is the boundary between the diatreme breccia pipes on the left and basically basaltic country rock on the right. So a lot of these copper samples seem to fall very close to the wall of that diatreme pipe, which we'll have a closer look at a little bit later. So this is a classic view of the diatreme breccia. Again, in these cases, they're rhyolite fragments, but we get a lot of other things in here. Typically, fragments up to 1 to 2 centimeters, but here you're getting larger fragments. Here's a sort of a credit card size tag here. So these things are on the order of 15 to 20 centimeters. So sometimes you get much bigger blocks, and these ones are actually granite over here. There's some basaltic ones over here. So you're getting very mixed lithology. So these are rocks that are somewhere sitting at depth and that have been blasted up by this breccia pipe. And so they're actively quarrying this, and this is actually advantageous to Northern Shield. As they're quarrying, they're exposing some fresh rock, including over here where a lot of the latest excitement has come as we push westward. They're exposing some new mineralization, as we'll see. And so what is a breccia pipe? I've tried to combine it all into one diagram. This is more of a diatreme breccia. Sometimes when they break surface, they're called the diatreme mar complex, where you actually get volcano and pyroclastics falling out on either side. But somewhere at depth, you would have an intrusion. And usually what happens, that hits either the water table or hydrothermal fluids that creates a steam explosion. And that's why you get this, these breccia pipes. And again, they're brought up through, they're bringing out material from below. They're not usually this simple, just one individual breccia pipe. Clearly in the pits at Root and Cellar, we see multiple episodes of repeated pipes coming up at different time periods As I say, we're still in the process of mapping it, but there's a lot of clearly violent magmatic activity, constantly explosive activity happening. And I say, amongst other things, they fracture the country rock, and of course that creates permeability structures for these mineralizing fluids to flow. So in particular, as they expand this pit westward, this is a view of the pit about a month ago. Amongst other things, they exposed this hydrothermal breccia vein, which we'll have a closer look at. And within 25 to 30 meters, we started seeing what we believe are fragments of primary copper porphyry mineralization and other rock types that are very conducive to a copper porphyry system. And so here's a picture of, we can't get too close because obviously after they blast, there's a lot of loose material. And at some point, we'll actually use a drone to fly closer to the rock face to have a closer look at, sort of basically map out the rock face from a drone rather than getting too close. But as I say, as they're moving deeper and westward, they're exposing some very interesting mineralization. Having a closer look at that hydrothermal breccia, it seems to be at least sort of a couple meters wide. It actually, we think it forms about 25, 50 meters further to the right of that photograph. And this is what it sort of looks like, mixture of both angular fragments and sort of rounded silica ooze. Some of these fragments you can see are very well bedded, and these probably mean that this was actually, again, another geyser pool on surface. So this thing, at one point, this would have been the paleo surface of that volcanic crater. And this thing repeatedly exploded, and it started forming a little pond of geyser sediments, just like Yellowstone. And again, this thing repeatedly exploded, and then ripped up some of these fragments. So we assume at one point this was very near to the paleo surface, just like we saw at Conquest zone. So this complete system, the system is intact. It's anomalous in gold, arsenic, moly, as well as elevated lead, zinc, tellurium. Not so much copper, but again, if this is near surface, your copper is transported by hotter fluids, so that would have dropped out and precipitated at depth. Whereas the time it gets to surface, it's just carrying these pathfinder minerals. So this is one of the things that really started getting us excited recently, is finding this clear evidence of a hydrothermal system within these free atomagmatic or diatreme breccias. Just having a closer look, because I think there's pretty neat rocks. Again, here, this blackish gray one is a hydrothermal breccia. It's obviously intruded the diatreme breccia, but you can see here's a little sort of finger of a diatreme breccia, but it actually came after the hydrothermal breccia, because we can see it sort of intruding into the hydrothermal breccia. And here's a fragment of that hydrothermal breccia within the diatreme. So again, this is just evidence of repeated explosive activity and various different diatreme breccia pipes coming up, what they call nested pipes coming up into each other. So the hydrothermal breccia is one of the evidence that sort of points towards a copper porphyry or mineralizing hydrothermal system. We go back to the original samples of prospector found in the pit when I was first started. So lots of chalcopyrite, sometimes bornite. These are actually now directly hosted in the diatreme breccia. And here you can see chalcopyrite following along what looks like a little bit of a rhyolite veinlet. Here again, it's in a very solidified portion of the diatreme breccia, and you're getting chalcopyrite surrounding one of these clasts. So again, that's classic indication of these copper-bearing fluids infiltrating the diatreme breccia, because it's very, very porous. But again, perhaps even more exciting than the quite spectacular chalcopyrite pictures we just saw is this fragment here, which looks like it's showing what's primary copper porphyry style mineralization. We've got a very silicious fragment. It looks like it's potassic too by its pink color. Perhaps early stage UST textures as well, which is a texture you commonly get at the top of these porphyry systems. But it contains chalcopyrite, bornite, and some other silvery mineral we have yet to identify, but we believe this is a fragment showing primary copper porphyry style mineralization. So again, this is a fragment, so it's telling us that somewhere down below there's a rock with this style of mineralization. And to say if we can confirm that's copper porphyry type, then we know there is something at depth. There's a few more textures of rocks for the geologists out there. Here's what looks like probably an aplite. So this is forming again at the very top of a granite batholith, typically where you're going to get your copper porphyry system, perhaps some UST textures. And this photo was just sent by the prospector today as he was cutting some of these rocks, what we call a B vein. So it has this little suture down the middle. And again, in this rock, you see is bornite and chalcopyrite. There's another rock sample with chalcocite. So perhaps, again, supergene enrichment. We do see a lot of molybdenite as well, particularly on sort of on the flanks of these diatreme breccias. And again, that goes hand in hand with the fact that this thing is alkaline driven. You typically get more molybdenite in these copper molybdenite gold porphyries when you have alkaline driven systems. As well, just recently, at the same time, we started finding this very weird looking rock here, what we think is a fawn-like porphyry. Again, that would be an alkaline intrusion, but whatever it is, we haven't seen it before on the property. As they're expanding that pit, we're very, very quickly seeing quick transitions in both geology and mineralization. So again, we'll get assays for this more for the whole rock chemistry to tell us whether it's alkaline or not, but it is a rock type we've never seen before. And again, this contains bornite, which is a copper sulfide mineral, a high temperature copper sulfide mineral. So again, very rapid changes in what we're seeing at in the pits at the Conquest zone, at the Creston zone. So to summarize what we think we may have happening here, okay, some of the original samples, these are hosted directly in the diatreme. These are more vein-like. This is not the classic copper porphyry style mineralization. That seems to be very close, as I mentioned early on, that it's within the diatreme, but perhaps very close to the contact of the country rock. So it's the wall of the diatreme breccia. So this is typically where you're going to get your better mineralization, or it's coming near to surface, because there's obviously more weakness along the wall of that diatreme pipe, so the copper hot fluid's keying to surface. Whereas in the middle of the quarry, where we're seeing that hydrothermal breccia, maybe it's that structure does come to surface, but for now, it just has the pathfinders, whereas if you follow it down, you might start getting into either breccia-hosted copper or eventually into the copper porphyry, which probably sits closer to the top of the intrusion at depth. And again, we're seeing fragments in at least one phase of that diatreme pipe. So there must have been a later diatreme pipe intruding within it, and it brought up fragments of what looks like primary copper porphyry mineralization. So we have the hydrothermal breccia, the diatreme breccia copper, and now fragments of copper porphyry, all in the same diatreme pipe. So just throwing on some geophysics now. So these sort of white shaded areas are where we're seeing diatreme breccias to date. And, there's obviously a very distinct magnetic low with a fairly sharp contact. So what we're doing now is trying to map out the western contact to see how big these diatreme pipes are. We actually found one exposed on the road, on the highway, originally just outside the claim boundaries, but we've now included that in the Root and Cellar property. So they already have a significant strike length. It's about 1.6 kilometers from here, where we see copper-bearing diatreme breccias. And early on this year, we started finding diatreme breccias up in here. We haven't done a lot of sampling, but there's certainly diatreme breccias. So there's about a 1.6 kilometer strike length, at least, of these diatreme pipes. They seem to trend to the northeast, but potentially with the geophysics, maybe there's a big ring of these things. We don't know yet. Certainly the gold sort of forms a ring around a feature in here. So whether they're a big circular structure or more of a northeast trend, we don't know yet, but they're certainly very, very sizable, both from what we've seen to date and what's suggested by the geophysics. And so we talked about the model of how these things, the very beginning, we showed the model of the copper porphyry at depth, and then the gold on the side, and typically higher up in the system. So we'll look at our a real world example of one of these copper porphyry gold systems. This one's Lepanto in the Philippines, and off to the side you have this is the gold bearing portion, the low sulfidation portion of that Lepanto copper gold deposit. That at depth they have the copper porphyry ore. Okay, and so that's if you think back to the image we had it in the beginning, that very simplified diagram where you have the copper at depth and the gold on the side. That's exactly what we're seeing in a real case scenario, in this case of Lepanto. And so you look at what we know at Root and Cellar, where the mineralization is occurring. Why couldn't that be this sort of cross section here, or even you come across here where you're going from gold on the fringes into the copper, and we're only just beginning to see that. in these quarries, but this may be dealing with a situation just like this at Root and Cellar. Lepanto, they're mining both the gold and the copper. They're both minable quantities and grade. We don't know whether Root and Cellar is the same size or has a grades, but when you see the signature that we're seeing at Root and Cellar, just on the gold and the copper alone, let alone all the other indications, and then knowing the copper porphyry epithermal model, and it does happen in real life as we see from Lepanto, you very much want to follow up on the copper potential at Root and Cellar. We don't know whether the gold's more important, the copper, or perhaps they're both there in mineable quantities. But when you see a signature the size of this, you certainly want to pursue it with expedience, knowing that things like Lepanto do exist. So the only way we're going to find that is to continue internally mapping these diatremes to try to understand their internal structure and what sort of phase of diatremes may be bringing up the copper mineralization. And we could define their lateral extent so we know how big they are. We're going to do this by prospecting, systematic sampling. At some point, we need to do geophysics. We've already done magnetics, but we'd like to do IP or perhaps airborne MT magnetotellurics over these pipes, which is often used for copper porphyry mineralization. The only problem is we've got a lot of metal equipment in those pits. The main target may not be underneath those pits, maybe off to the side, but still there's going to be a lot of surface noise that we have to deal with. And at the same time, as we're continuing to refine the geological map and geological sections in the Conquest zone, partly to see how that stands up on its own as a gold target and how it may be related to the copper porphyry potential at Root and Cellar. Because again, going back to here, you just never know. We've been following in a certain way, but maybe the trend should be going down towards the center of the copper. So I say it was, quite a big, we've always known about the copper, but suddenly seeing, again, clear evidence of hydrothermal activity and silicification and sulfides in the core of that pipe certainly motivated us, along with some opinions that we got along the way from various groups that have visited Root and Cellar to pursue the copper aspect of this quite vigorously, which is why we've been focused on it since the drill program. And we actually drive by these pits. Every day when we went to the drill, you drive by these pits, and we often stop in just to see after every few blasts what has changed. And I say they're seeing some very rapid changes at the quarries right now. So I say the idea is to do this work very quickly to generate a drill target within the diatremes, or basically on that Creston Copper Target. So we'll try to get that up to a drill-ready target by the time we get to going back to Conquest sometime this fall, so we can be re-drilling Conquest along with the Creston Copper Target. And so just on a technical summary of Root Cellar, I'd say you start off on a big scale. Okay, we're in a belt and extension, so that you can check that box. We're in the right area for large-scale copper and gold deposits. We got the fluorite, so we got the right fluid scavenging in copper and molybdenum. You got tellurium, which is particularly indicative of very large copper and gold deposits. So we don't see a lot of tellurium. We see a little bit of tellurium in some of the other occurrences in the Avalon, but not to the extent of what we're seeing at Root and Cellar. And now we're finding, diatremes, nested diatremes, and diatreme mark complexes. And certainly when you start finding these in the right regions around the world, you want to be looking at them pretty seriously for large-scale copper and epithermal gold targets. And of course, we do have 5 other gold and silver occurrences, along with some of them are associated with lead zinc. So again, these are very classic low to intermediate to high sulfidation gold occurrences, which occur above or on the fringes of copper porphyry. We now have multiple phases of intrusive porphyritic rock that we see in the quarry, and most of these copper porphyries, you don't get one lithology, one rock type underlying that copper porphyry. You get a multiple of these porphyry stocks, and we're seeing that right now, including what may be an alkaline intrusive. Right from day one, we've had high-grade diatreme-hosted copper mineralization, and now we're seeing hydrothermal breccias with sinter, so we know the system's intact, and perhaps primary fragments of copper porphyry, and certainly what looks like B-type veins. So everything is telling us that this certainly is elephant country when it comes to both the gold and now certainly the copper porphyry target at Creston. And so, the opportunity here is, ongoing discoveries at Root and Cellar, both on the gold and the copper front, indicate that Root and Cellar is very well positioned as a prime camp scale investment opportunity for porphyry copper and epithermal gold. We're really first movers in this area on both the porphyry and the epithermal golds. We understand these. We're going to understand the regional structure as well, very, very well. And you say Root and Cellar, the more we look at it, is sharing many characteristics with other well-known world-class copper, porphyry, and gold jurisdictions. We know that there's a lot of tellurium associated with both the copper and the gold. So these are indications typically of giant systems. The footprint of the mineralization is showing us very large. We know we found the sinter both in Conquest and now in the quarry, so we know these things are all preserved. And of course, we own 100% of this project. And again, it's located in Newfoundland, minutes away from a paved highway and a deep water port on the Atlantic seaboard. And certainly, Newfoundland doesn't come to mind in the geological community as a prime place for copper porphyries and epithermal gold. But certainly, I think, as you see, we've got every indication that we're onto a significant system there. And we've known that for the gold, and now it's coming true. It seems to be coming true for the porphyry. So we're very eager to get Creston up to drill-ready caliber and try to get a few holes into that absolutely as soon as we can. So I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thank you for the presentation, Ian. Now, I know there's a lot of people in the room and quite a few questions, but I just had a couple of my own to run through first. I know you did mention it during your presentation, but since it's come up twice in the chat and it's on the boards, just as a reminder to folks in the room, when are assay results coming in? When can investors expect them? We've
been told mid-October, and so that's from the lab. I said we pushed them the other day, and they indicated that they apologize for the long time frame, but it is what it is, and it's going to be somewhere around mid-October. Perfect.
Thank you very much, Ian. Now, I know the diatreme breccia pipes, they appear to be, just based on everything you just said, a key part of the geological model. So what are, to you, the most compelling features that you're observing that suggest these could be similar to those major diatreme hosted systems elsewhere in the world that you mentioned?
Well, the main thing is that, you got a diatreme pipe. You don't need a diatreme pipe for a copper porphyry, but they sort of enhance potentially the grade, because you have different styles of mineralization, and now you're getting more into sort of chunky vein-like mineralization coming up through the breccia pipes, and maybe only breccia hosted in the end. But we see quite large, and what we call nested diatreme pipes. So your repeated activity of explosive magmatic events. We're now seeing then multiple different types of rock types that are forming those intrusions that are creating those explosions, and you almost always see that in underlying copper porphyry camps is not just one type of rock type, but multiple types of porphyritic rock, and we're seeing that. And I think one of the critical things is now that hydrothermal breccia vein or structure, and so we very clearly have hydrothermal activity coming up in that middle of that pipe. And along with now what looks like copper porphyry fragments. So all these are ingredients that the big copper porphyry districts, whether it's Pacific Rim, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, or you close on in Chile's, we have a lot of those signatures at Root and Cellar in these diatreme pipes. And as I say, it's very quickly beginning to attract some attention, including ours.
There you go. I got one about tellurium. So it's obviously, to me, playing multiple roles in this story. It's a critical metal, but it's also a geological indicator. So how do you broadly look at the element adding value to the project?
Yeah, it's I say the market is largely controlled out of China. I think tellurium trades around $100 a kilo. So it may not be a huge value at the end of the day, but it's still a value, and it's strategic. And certainly, the last few months, Europeans are a little bit more critical metal focused than we are. It's attracted attention over in Europe. So I say it has multiple aspects. The critical metal value, as well as an indicator of the copper porphyry and the gold. So it's actually a very useful element to have floating around. And that's why we changed the assay package that we use to detect it at a lower level, not just to get it when it was sort of coming into that realm of economic grade, but detecting it at lower values so we can actually use it as a pathfinder and an indicator. But it's relatively rare. You see it some around in some of the other big mining jurisdictions. As say Colorado, Nevada has a lot of this, and they're associated with some pretty rich mining, copper porphyry and gold mining districts. And so it's pretty exciting to see it here at Root and Cellar, as extensive as we are.
Great. I know the Barren Peninsula seems to have those unique geological characteristics that caught your attention. So a couple questions. What drew you to this area in the first place? And then what advantages do you see in developing a project in that location?
Yeah, well, the first thing was these rocks that the prospector found, the chalcopyrite, the shiny stuff, the visible gold, the gold values he was finding in the trench. But then when we got to the property as well, it was the alteration. I mean, these rocks are absolutely butchered by alterations, so much so that it makes it hard time sometimes knowing what we're mapping because they've been altered so much. And that's a good thing, because both the gold and the copper, if they're at different times, they're producing their own alteration halo. And so, a big long-lived system, has the same, is creating a big alteration halo and a complex alteration halo. Then if you have one, whether it's copper first or the gold later, or vice versa, you now have overlapping alteration patterns that are hard to sort of pull apart. But the bottom line is the rocks are really butchered by alteration, and that's a good sign. So that was one of the early indications that it wasn't just by random the prospector was finding the mineralization, that these looked like part of a big system. The other thing I liked about Root and Cellar, or the Buren, is its accessibility. Good infrastructure nearby. Root and Cellar is 10 minutes at best from, even if the pits are even closer, they're about 500 meters off the highway. So it's accessibility. And then very early on, we noticed, we weren't sure what was causing at that time this belt that cuts across the Barren Peninsula. The Geological Survey of Newfoundland call it the ankle bracelet, because that Barren Peninsula is, they call the limb, because it sort of comes down like a leg. Then you have the knee, and then you have the ankle where Root and Cellar sits, and the foot. There's a few other epithermal occurrences, and so that nobody really knew what was happening, but the general perception now that there's some sort of zone of extension there that's creating that. So that was sort of the third big factor as to something different was happening here. And then of course the fluorite that's being mined right now is actually a deposit that's being mined about 30 kilometers down the peninsula from Root and Cellar. And there's a lot of other showings, and whether that is directly related to Root and Cellar or not, it's hard to say, but it somehow probably is, because when you get fluorite, tellurium in the same jurisdictions around the world, you tend to find big copper or gold deposits. And I say it's a location, as it really doesn't get better than this. You can, it's accessible, easily accessible. Easy accessibility, then lowers your overall exploration costs and hopefully your development costs down the road. And again, it's here in Newfoundland, and I think, that could be of strategic importance, being on the Atlantic seaboard and not the Pacific.
Sure, no, that makes sense. I know with recent drilling complete and plans for the rest of the year kind of taking shape, my question is, what are you most looking forward to testing? Where do you think the highest impact, most exciting discoveries will come from?
Why not both? They have both at Lepanto and other deposits around the world. Why can't we have both of mineable grade and mineable quantity? But we don't know. But obviously there's a lot of exciting developments on the Creston Copper front. So it's going to be exciting to see what's under there. Maybe we actually see more of the Conquest zone coming underneath the Conquest. Maybe the copper's not a red herring, but it's not the main target, but it's part of that. Where these epithermal systems bounce around, they're not always at the same level. They bounce between low sulfidation, high, and even into the mesothermal. So maybe the copper's being created by that fluctuation in the epithermal system. But at the end of the day, it's hard not to be excited about the copper based on how quickly things have progressed the last few weeks. So we haven't even, started drilling, obviously. And again, when you think about its location, I say potentially the copper will have more strategic importance than a gold deposit on the Atlantic seaboard.
That makes sense. Now, before I get into the tons of good questions in the chat, I'll just say for investors considering Northern Shield, and I know some of them are in the room, what are the key developments or results you'd point to as the most important catalyst to watch for?
Well, things are changing very rapidly right now, obviously, with what we've been seeing the prospectors as they active in the pits right now, trying to poke around, find some more mineralization. We hope to get to drilling. There's a lot of work to do before that, at least at the Creston zone. Specifically, we should do some geophysics, but we'd like to map out these things. So there's a lot of work to do there, but we'd like to try to get to drill it as soon as we can, hopefully this fall, along with the Conquest zone. But, the big catalyst would be to start drill testing the copper target. Along with that, it's attracting quite a bit of attention by those people in the copper world. You don't expect to find these things on Newfoundland, but there is the right terrain. The Avalon terrain is the right terrain for these things. But when you think of big copper porphyry deposits and epithermal gold deposits, or even camps, a lot of people don't think of Newfoundland, but it seems to be very real right now. And so it is attracting some attention.
There you go. So there's two big groups of questions from the chat today. There's folks who I think are clearly already following the story and then new to the story. So I'll start with the questions from folks that I think are familiar with the story. Then I'll jump into the kind of Northern Shield 101 stuff. So that's how we're going to tackle these questions today. So JMac from the chat asked, do you have a sense of the anticipated cost to advance the copper targets to a first pass drill phase?
Sorry, what would be the cost?
Anticipated cost, yeah.
Typically to go in there and drill another 3,000 meter, and even if we split that between the gold and copper, is roughly $600,000. But one of the big steps is doing geophysics. We're trying to decide what type of geophysics that should be. That's probably going to be on the order of another, let's say, a couple $100,000, along with some mapping and sampling. I think we need to keep on mapping and understand the geology here. But clearly, we've kind of seen enough to take that next step, which is really geophysics. You could wing a hole and put it right underneath the pit, but you definitely want to at least try some sort of geophysics. So, on the order of 200,000 to get it to that next stage, 200,000 or 300,000 to get to the next stage, including some geophysics, and then drilling, which could be split between Conquest and Creston.
Great. GB from the chat asks, how is follow-up drilling going to be funded?
Well, again, hopefully that'll be perhaps some interest that we're getting right now on the project, and hopefully the assays will again create an opportunity to raise money at a higher price. But right now we're getting a lot of interest in Root and Cellar, and I think we'll get that money to go back for another drill program at Conquest, as well as the first one at Creston.
Awesome. HJ from the chat asks, any permits needed to drill in the quarry? Is it safe broadly?
Oh yeah, you need permits to drill anywhere. Once we get a target, we may not be drilling in the pit. We may be drilling outside it, underneath it. Obviously, we'll have a conversation with. It's safe depending where you are. You don't want to be too near these the walls of the quarry. Sure. And we have to have discussions with the operators of that. We don't want to interfere with their work. At the same time, it's a mutual benefit to everyone to continue developing this project. So we need permits to drill anywhere. And as part of that permitting, if you needed to drill within the quarry, is to get their permission. We haven't had those conversations yet, but I can't see it being a problem. But anyhow, we can step right outside the pit and drill underneath it, which we'll probably do anyhow, just to get down to the right depth.
Makes sense.
But as I say, it's just nice to even have that access. You don't even have to, bush crash initially. You can just drive up the road and plunk a drill at the edge of the road, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. JMac asks, once you change the risk profile with geophysics and initial first pass drill program, is it feasible to JV only a copper-focused area that might have incidental gold while retaining the gold target areas of the property?
You can, but it always gets complicated when you try to dice up a property. It's a good size, but it's not huge, and you never know if you do it based on commodity, what happens with the little bit of gold that's within the copper porphyry. Or say the gold veins cut underneath the copper porphyry. It's a second event and it cuts underneath. So are you doing it based on commodity, or are you doing it based on fencing in an area? But the problem is if you fence an area, say, okay, well, we're only jigging this part, what we think is the copper, not the gold. I think ultimately you're kind of losing value in the property because now you're cutting it up. I think we can generate some interest in root and cellar, even if it's just on the copper. There's a lot of people who doesn't want copper and gold, right? You get the benefit of a critical metal, and the most important of the critical metals, along with gold. So, and we know a lot of companies that are typically into copper really like the aspect of having gold as a byproduct, if that's what it is. So our idea is we ideally would like to keep it whole right now. And what we're really looking for is a strategic partnership rather than a joint venture at this stage.
It makes sense. David Whitaker asks, and I hope you know what he's referring to here, says you had a paper written a few months ago by a geo student that you were interested in applying to the geology of root and cellar. Is this thesis relevant to what you're seeing today with the expansion into the quarry area?
Yeah, I mean, his work didn't include his main focus was not in the quarries on the copper, it was more on the gold side. We just received a draft of that the other day. We can't make it public until it's finalized and been published. But his work both on the geochemistry, the dating, more in the Conquest zone has implications, especially the alteration. Some of his work was very useful at using geochemical plots to distinguish both the strength of alteration, so how far away you are from the source, and also the vector and what event you're dealing with, whether you're dealing with the copper event or whether you're dealing with the gold event. And so that's going to be very, very useful. As I say, we just got a draft the other day, so we're still plowing through it. But yeah, exceptionally useful work, much more so than we first thought when we got involved with this thesis project. But it just shows, it's about little things can make a big difference. And one of the things I noted too on his report is, he suggested this is an incredibly well preserved volcanic package that you don't expect to see in the age of rocks. That these are roughly 550 to 600 million little rocks. It's a very well preserved system, and hopefully that has implications to any deposit as well.
Sure. Okay, I've got a couple of obviously first-timers to Northern Shield questions. So first, do you consider yourself an exploration company not looking to get to production yourself?
Correct. We've always been an exploration company. That's where our strength is, especially the early stage projects. That's what most of our shareholder base is their interest in that exploration phase where you go from sort of 0 to 60. Production is a different set of skills. We find something big enough, we can acquire those skills. But yes, we are an exploration company. We like this space, this early stage space. That's the beginning, I think, where I think you can find things like root and cellar, which is simply, even though they're right next to a highway, we're the first company to explore it because we think outside the box and we're willing to tackle these type of projects. And, for relatively small budgets, you can potentially find a world-class deposit where we are, right off a highway, right from a deep water port, simply because you're willing to, to go and look. So yeah, we like that early stage exploration. We're definitely an explorer, not a producer, and that's what most of our shareholders are interested or involved in is that exploration stage. So the idea is to prove something up and get taken out as soon as we can, right? So
perfect. One question, I know you just mentioned the highway and we've talked about it already today, but let's talk quickly about the existing facilities and infrastructure nearby to support a mine. Are there any nearby mills?
Nearby mills, no. I mean, not in the gold copper front. Obviously, there's a mine at the fluorite deposit 30 kilometers away, but they don't have this. That's going to be a totally different game than a copper gold system. No nearby mills. Obviously, there's the across the bay. There's the Long Harbor smelter for nickel copper from Voisey Bay. But you know, that's again slightly different. But there's a smelter across the bay that's taking all the ore from Voisey Bay. But in the Buren, there's, other than the fluorite deposit, there's no operating mine, so no mills.
Two other questions just about the region. Is there a problem that you find or you can conceive of getting quality staff to come to Newfoundland? And are you near a town with available resources?
Yeah, Marystown, which is about a population of 8,000 to 10,000 people, is 10 minutes away. Skilled people, yeah. I mean, a lot of Newfoundlanders work out of province. They're in the mines in Ontario. They're in the mines in the Northwest Territories. They're in Fort McMurray. They're offshore, so they have a lot of these skill sets for mining and development. But a lot of them are working out of province, and certainly after COVID, there's sort of a push for trying to get some of these workers to come home, because obviously they're spending a lot of time away from family. So yeah, there's Marystown right there, 10 minutes away. There's other smaller towns up and down the Buren, but even within Newfoundland, I think you'd quickly get that labor force, because even if they're not coming from Marystown, at least they're in the same province. They're only a few hour drive away, as opposed to flying halfway across the country. So a lot of skilled people in Newfoundland that are very familiar with mining and mine development.
Great. One question: what's generally Northern Shield's cash position right now? How well funded are you for upcoming events?
So we're about I think 250,000 after that drill program. So we're good for a little bit, but we have some interest, and we're going to see if any of that can materialize. There's been interest in financing us actually right now in the equity markets, but we'll just wait and see. There's some interest there, and we'll see if that materializes quickly. But we don't want to delay it too much, because we want to try to get this drill ready before the end of the year, and so we want to move on it quite quickly.
Great. Time for
we're working actively right now. As I say, we're doing what we can. It's simply trying to map out the parameters here and find any copper mineralization or any other indications that could push this forward quickly. And that's happening. It's quite remarkable how quickly we're seeing a transition in the geology and mineralization.
Great. Time for one last question before we jump today. Somebody in the chat asked, the tellurium is very interesting. Do you anticipate any metallurgical challenges to extract it in addition to the more abundant elements?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we don't have that skill set, but typically tellurium is often, at least in the, they're extracting it from what they call sludges. So they were going back to some of the processing products from the copper mining in certain U.S. mines, and now extracting that tellurium from it. So I don't think it has any negative impact on processing. But at this stage, I can't be conclusive on that.
Awesome. Well, Ian, I know we're towards the end of the hour. I really, really appreciate your time today. I think people learned a lot, and hopefully they understand what you're seeing at the Copper Potential Root and Cellar. I know we grilled you about 100 questions, so appreciate your willingness to run through them all. And everybody in the chat, thank you so much. If you have any additional questions for Ian, please do let us know. I'll make sure that the team gets them. But thank you all for your time today. I know we ran the full hour, so really appreciate it. And Ian, thank you so much. I'll throw it to you for any last words.
No, thank you very much, Romeo. And please, anybody who have questions, send them off either directly or through Six. We are certainly very excited by what we've been seeing the last few weeks, and so are others. And so we're just going to, keep our heads down or keep our boots on the ground in that area and trying to move this forward. And we don't know whether the copper story or gold story or both, but I think it's all very, very positive. It's a very exciting times.
Awesome. Ian, thank you so much, and I hope everybody has a great end of their day.